Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're just going to let folks join the Zoom call and get started in a little bit. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining.
No, se escucha muy bien.
We're just going to wait a little bit as more and more people join the Zoom room. 1 more minute and we'll get started. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I think we're going to get started now.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second session of our event. First of all, I would like to call Julia from the CSPM Secretary to give us some information about our schedule here. And after that, I will present the agenda for everybody. So, Julia, please.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. Welcome everyone to this public event. My name is Julia from the CSIPM Secretariat. I would like to remind everyone that today we have interpretation in English, Spanish, and French. To listen to the interpretation, please go on the interpretation icon below in Zoom and select your preferred language. In order to facilitate effective communication, please remain on mute throughout the whole call. And if you wish to speak during the discussion session, please use the raise hand function that you can find below. It's also important to remind everyone to please speak slowly and clearly, and especially when addressing the whole audience, so that the interpreters can do their job in an appropriate way and everyone can be understood by all the participants. And also, please, if you have a headphone with a microphone incorporated, please use that, because that helps to maintain the sound more clear. And remind to please speak from a quiet location, because every minor sound is actually amplified in the ears of our dear interpreters. And last, I would like to remind everyone that this public event is recorded. And if you have any issue with that, please don't hesitate to write to us in the chat. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Julia.
Thank you,
Bien.
Julia. Once again, welcome to all. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. This is the second of two public events organized by the liaison group of the CSIPM for the People's Autonomous Response to the UNFSS, the UN Summit on Food Systems. It's also organized by the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems and the People's Working Group on Multistakeholderism. My name is Elisabetta Resini. I'm the president of the National Council of Nutritional and Food Security in Brazil, and I'm also on the IPES-Food panel. The objective of this seminar is to provide a counterpart at a moment of the UN Food Summit that will take place in 2 weeks, and raise awareness about the normalization of the corporate capture of decision-making on food. In this 2-hour virtual session, we will start by hearing presentations on 3 recent reports on multi-stakeholderism, as well as the corporate capture of global food governance and the impact of UNFSS national pathways to sustainable food systems in Africa. First of all, we're going to hear from Jennifer Clapp, who is a professor and the Canada Research Chair in Global Food Security and Sustainability at the University of Waterloo, and a member of the IPES-Food. She's going to present IPES-Food's report, Who's Tipping the Scales? The Growing Influence of Corporations on the Governance of Food Systems and How to Counter It. Then we'll hear from Shalmali Guttal, who is the Executive Director of Focus on the Global South and another member of IPES-Food, and a representative of the liaison group who will present the liaison group's report, Multistakeholderism and the Corporate Capture of Global Food Governance. Lastly, we'll hear from Sefu Sani from the World March of Women and Mamadou Goita, the Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives in Development, and a member of IPES-Food as well, both from the African Coordination Group, and they will share the findings from their monitoring report on UNFSS national pathways. After these 3 presentations, we will have a question and answer session with all the presenters, and we would like to ask you to prepare your questions and either post them in the chat or raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your question. After that, we'll have the second half of the event, which will consist of a panel discussion among all the presenters on how to address the UN Food Systems Summit and potential frameworks and strategies to move forward. There will be another opportunity for questions and answers at the end of that session as well. And again, we encourage you to use the chat function or to raise your hand to ask a question. Before we get to the presentations, I would like to invite Dee Woods from the UK Land Workers Alliance, also from Via Campesina, and a member of the People's Autonomous Response to the UN Food Systems Summit, to give some introductory remarks to set the scene and to remind us why this moment in history, in light of the UNFSS and the counter-mobilization to the UNFSS, demonstrates a critical juncture in the future of food. And this is one of the main reasons why we've organized these two sessions. So now I'd like to invite Dee Woods to share her analysis. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Elisabetta. And this is a group analysis and statement that I will be delivering. So scheduled for the 24th to the 26th of July in Rome, the UNFSS+2 stocktaking moment is an event of the United Nations Secretary General, hosted by Italy and organized in collaboration with the Rome-based UN agencies. This gathering will be attended by various prominent figures, including from the UN leadership, several heads of state, and other high-level representatives of member states. The UNFSS+2 stock-taking moment is poised to repeat the failures of the FFS itself, further advancing industrial food systems and opening the door of the UN to even greater influence by large private companies and their networks without any corporate accountability framework in place. The stock-taking moment is designed to ignore the need for deep structural transformations in our food systems, emphasizing instead a model that prioritizes profit-making over public interests. Over the past 3 years, multiple groups, social movements, Indigenous peoples, youth, women, and gender diverse people have offered concrete proposals and demands for the advancement of agroecology, food sovereignty, biodiversity, gender justice and diversity, youth agency, climate justice, economic and social justice in food systems. These proposals have consistently been disregarded, a pattern that has continued in 2021 and heightened in 2023. This is particularly concerning given the skyrocketing levels of hunger and malnutrition, increasing inequalities, and the intertwined existential crises that humanity and our planet face. Against this backdrop, civil society and Indigenous peoples organizations once again voiced their concerns through this public statement. So 2 years ago, the UNFSS faced an unprecedented counter-mobilization with more than 9,000 participants challenging the pre-summit in July 2021. Groups in all regions of the world testify to the actions they are taking on the ground to transform food provisioning. A huge number of actors from civil society, small-scale food producers and workers' organizations, Indigenous peoples, women, youth, government, academia, UN, as well as experienced individuals from inside and outside the summit expressed strong reservations about its structure, political orientation, and organizing process, which from the beginning undermined the achievements in democratic multilateralism made with the reformed UN Committee on World Food Security. The political declaration addressed to the UNFSS in September 2021 was endorsed by more than 700 international and national organizations and more than 300 academics, and activists. The key concerns of the council mobilization were also echoed through hundreds of academic papers, publications on social media, and mentions in media outlets across the world, such as the BBC, Al Jazeera, Italian state TV Rai, Le Monde, El País, The Guardian, and many more. However, the People's Summit, as the organizers called it, and the convoluted corporate-centric processes leading up to it disappointed the very people it was supposed to serve. The summit failed to address the most important drivers of the growing world hunger and climate crises, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, industrial agriculture, and corporate concentration in food systems. With its multi-stakeholderism approach, the summit also failed member states and multilateralism at large. While a group of UN senior officials, some governments, especially from the OECD countries, together with several corporate networks, philanthropists, and aligned corporate-friendly academics and NGOs wielded strong influence on the summit's process and content. A great number of member states, especially from Global South, were marginalized. Crucially, the summit failed human rights. Critiques of weak human rights grounding of the summit were expressed eloquently and frequently by so many actors from inside and outside the summit, but were consistently ignored. In parallel, the summit undermined the hard-fought achievements of a more democratic global food governance, such as the UN Committee on World Food Security and its science policy interface, the high-level panel of experts. So 2 years later, there's no change in direction. Following the UNFFS summit in September 2021, important steps were taken to ensure its follow-up, even though the summit's plan of action was only a UN Secretary General statement, which had not been negotiated or approved by an intergovernmental process. Despite
2 minutes, please.
Okay, despite explicit promises by the UN Deputy Secretary General before the summit that no new structures would be created, a new UN Food Systems Coordination Hub was established, hosted by the FAO and jointly led by the UN Deputy Secretary General and heads of the FAO, WFP, IFAD, WHO, and UNEP. And this new structure is equipped with a biannual budget of US dollars of 14 million, more than double the budget of the CFS. But the key messages that we really want to bring today is that overcoming the global crisis of hunger and malnutrition requires urgent and coordinated actions that respond to the needs, rights, and demands of those most affected. The UNFSS has not only overlooked these rights and demands and structural causes of these crises, but has also disguised business as usual, the consolidation of corporate industrial food systems as transformative action. And confronting UNFSS +2 social movements, Indigenous peoples, and civil society organizations from across the world express once again our deep concerns about the entrenchment of corporate power in the United Nations, and we raise our demands for real food systems change and call for strengthened democratic multilateralism within the UN. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Muchísimas gracias, Dee.
Thank you so much, Dee. Sorry so much for having to interrupt you, but we obviously have lots to get back in. Thank you so much for elucidating more about the complexity of the situation. Now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Jennifer Clapp, who is a researcher in food security, and also she is a member of IPES-Food. So she is going to share with us now some conclusions from the report, tipping the scales on the evolution of various different kinds of corporate capture. Jennifer, please. 10 minutes. And we have maybe 2 minutes left. We might let you know. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta, and I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah, it's okay.
Perfect. So thank you, Elisabetta, and I'm very happy to be here today to present the findings of the IPES-Food report, Who is Tipping the Scales? The Growing Influence of Corporations on the Governance of Food Systems and How to Counter It. And in this report, we raised the alarm, much as Dee was just outlining, about the new ways in which decision-making processes on food in global governance settings are being captured by corporate interests. So what I'd like to cover in my brief 10 minutes is, as I said, key highlights, answering the questions, how did this happen? What are the consequences and what might we do about it? So as was already mentioned, and obviously this event is happening because the stock-taking moment is happening in just under 2 weeks, but the 2021 Food Systems Summit was really a watershed moment in drawing attention to corporate influence over public food governance through multi-stakeholder processes. And as we know, the summit itself followed a 2019 strategic partnership between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. And many were concerned that the UN Food Systems Summit, which opened the door widely to corporate involvement, was not transparent and was rife with conflicts of interest. And it was really indicative of how corporate influence over food system governance has really become a new normal, so to speak. And the stock-taking moment, as I said, taking place in less than 2 weeks, is a good time for us to reflect on these issues and to see basically where we've gotten in terms of highlighting the extent of these issues, but also where the campaign is to address it. So first, before getting into some of the key findings and recommendations, I just want to talk a little bit about the historical context, which I think is really important. We have to understand how we got to this state of affairs in the first place. And it's really important to recognize that this, I would call it a creep in a sense of corporate engagement in food governance has happened over the course of many decades. But we have to recall that in the 1970s, that it was actually a decade where there was a lot of skepticism about the role of transnational corporations in the UN system. Many developing countries were quite concerned about corporate capture, and there were efforts at the time to bring about transnational corporation like rules to keep these corporations to account. They had actually entrenched themselves in the 1960s within the FAO, and they were actually kicked out in the 1970s. So that's super interesting. But by the late 70s and early 80s, we started to see the rise of neoliberal economic policies that increasingly welcomed business into governance forums. And at the same time, antitrust rules that address corporate concentration were actually weakened, not just in the US, but also on a global scale. So by the 1990s, we were seeing large agribusiness firms increasingly engaging in voluntary market-based governance initiatives like certification schemes for palm oil, soy, meat, et cetera. And then by the early 2000s, agri-food firms began to engage more explicitly in public-private partnerships like GAIN and the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, and also increasingly providing and openly funding public institutions. And we saw partnerships like the FAO partnerships, with industry groups starting to emerge. And that's something that's still going on and people are quite concerned. And then more recently, we're seeing more of this multi-stakeholder initiatives where corporations are actually invited into governance settings, including in the UN, like the UN Food Systems Summit. And these kinds of partnerships really create a lot of serious conflicts of interest. And this has, in a way, been a process happening over decades and reaching a crescendo at the Food Systems Summit and also at this current moment. But it's not just these visible mechanisms like multi-stakeholder initiatives or partnerships or funding that are influencing food governance. It's important to recognize there are those visible kinds of interventions, but there are lots of less visible and indirect ways in which corporate actors are influencing global food governance. I mean, obviously they have a lot of market power through corporate concentration in the food system, and that concentration has becoming more and more entrenched as the decades have gone by, with lots of mergers and acquisitions leading to huge power of these firms as they control large swaths of the market. They're also lobbying behind closed doors. They're pushing their own corporate employees through revolving doors into government and other kinds of regulatory spaces. They're often sponsoring scientific research to shape policymakers' views. We saw this with lots of corporate funded studies, for example, on glyphosate, trying to influence regulatory decisions. And also they give political donations to candidates, and they exercise structural influence over trade and investment agreements. So there's just lots and lots of ways in which corporate actors are able to influence global food governance and governance that affects food systems. And so we need to be aware that this creep of corporate influence is not just what we see visibly, but also what is there more indirectly. And so through these various mechanisms I've just outlined, corporate involvement in global food governance has become effectively normalized. And Elizabeth has said that at the start. But there are huge problems with this approach. And what we wanted to do in this report is really highlight what those problems are. And so first, there are problems with respect to process. And these are really obvious problems, but we have to constantly remind ourselves this approach of corporate engagement in global food governance prioritizes what are called stakeholders, i.e. those with interests, over rights holders. In other words, citizenry who have a right to food. And in doing this prioritization of stakeholders over right holders, it tends to obscure the obligations of duty bearers, that is states, governments, whose responsibility it is to uphold rights, including the right to food. So although the UN Food Systems Summit claimed that it was a transparent process, critics counterclaimed that the agendas were set behind the scenes, where corporations tend to dominate in all the ways I've already outlined, and that effectively excluded genuine civil society and grassroots movement participation. And then second, there are problems with respect to outcomes. Obviously, if you have weak processes, you're likely to have weak outcomes. And what we've seen is corporate influence affecting the quality and effectiveness of governance initiatives. In fact, it's incredibly difficult to find evidence demonstrating outcomes of multi-stakeholder initiatives that are actually making a difference and whether they've actually achieved their goals. A lot of times it's just about the process, and then the outcome tends to get ignored. And the rules tend to be weak because they're often watered down by commercial interests. And third, concerning accountability. This is another big weakness. The corporate-dominated governance efforts, such as multi-stakeholder initiatives, typically avoid crafting rules that hold firms to account, both legally and financially, when their practices cause harm to people and to nature. And this enables corporate impunity for operations and practices that lack an effective mechanism or remedy for those who've been harmed. So in sum, there are just big problems with this corporate engagement. We're all very familiar with these. What we tried to do in the report is put them into these categories that are easy to grasp: process, outcome, accountability.
2 minutes, Jennifer.
Got it. Okay, so without action to address this situation, global food governance will continue to be shaped by private interests. And so we need to not only call out this trend, but we need to reverse it, and we need bold actions to do so. So in the report, we outlined 3 overarching principles for action and 3 accompanying recommendations. And since this is my last slide, by the way, Elizabeth, so don't worry. So the first principle and recommendation that we note in the report is that we need to address the outsized influence of transnational agri-food corporations at all levels of food systems. And this requires a multi-pronged approach. It requires creating mechanisms to manage conflicts of interests, creating measures to reduce corporate market power, developing stricter rules on lobbying, spending, campaign finance, and transparency in reporting. It requires countering the shaping of science and public discourse by large corporations, as well as redirecting government resources from serving private interests towards serving public interests instead. And one concrete, and this is a huge agenda, we recognize, and there are lots of challenges in achieving this, but we do recommend the development of a UN-wide corporate accountability framework to move beyond the kind of voluntary measures we've seen to date and to incorporate rules that can actually hold corporations accountable for the harms they cause. Secondly, we need to democratize current food governance forums like the CFS. It was reformed in 2009 and appears democratic, but we've seen this creep in which the corporate influence is getting greater and greater. And we need to reshape the CFS back into the public interest, including robust grievance mechanisms to address human rights violations and environmental destruction. So this means more inclusive participation mechanisms grounded in human rights. I mean, these are principles we really need to put forward and then put into action. And finally, we need to build up autonomous processes and spaces outside of the existing current frameworks that center the voices, claims, and proposals of people's organizations and social movements. So in other words, we need to amplify the agency and voice of women, Indigenous peoples, and frontline communities, and those who are being marginalized within global food systems to create their own autonomous spaces, to articulate their claims and proposals, to bring forward, in a sense, to bring that kind of normative power forward to address the situation. So with that, I will say thank you. I'm sorry if I went slightly over, Elisabetta, and I believe Nicole will share the link to the report for those of you who would like to view it. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was wonderful. Bueno, ahora invito a Shamali Gutti.
So now, Shamali Goodall, who is the Executive Director of Focus on the Global South, to speak. She's also a member of IPES-Food and the liaison group of the Autonomous Response to the UNFSS. She's going to present the conclusions of the report from the liaison group, as there are various different things to discuss in terms of corporate capture and multi-stakeholders, its impact, how it may develop, and how it could in fact become more significant in the future. Shamali, welcome, and you have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta, and thank you. Can the interpreters hear me? Okay. Am I audible? Yes. Okay.
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'll try and keep a check on my time as well. Well, it's an honor for me to be asked to present the key findings from the report that the liaison group of the People's Autonomous Response to the UN Food System Summit has prepared. The liaison group sits and is coordinated through the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples mechanism for relations with the UN Committee for World Food Security, the CFS. Now, many of us in the group and as part of the liaison group have been researching, monitoring, and writing about the expansion of corporate muscle and corporate power in global governance for many years. And, it's very clear to us that basically multi-stakeholderism is an attempt to legitimize and institutionalize the corporate capture of governance in various spheres. And, Jennifer's already gone through the findings of our report and, the report from IPES-Food. Now, of course, the corporate and associated philanthropic sector that is very attractive to the United Nations, because they can provide new resources that the multilateral system needs. But UN corporate partnerships are shifting global governance away from public interest and to serve corporate interests, while at the same time, they're laundering the reputations of many corporations as polluters, exploiters, and crisis profiteers. And another important aspect for us when we look at the issue of food governance and the expansion of multi-stakeholderism in food governance is how it blurs the distinction between public interest and corporate profit, between governments and corporations, and as a result, accountability.
You're muted, Shamali.
Oh,
Yeah.
is that okay?
Yes.
I was muted by accident by someone else. I think I didn't mute me. Anyway, right. So as a result, accountability and liability are out of reach, and power asymmetries and conflicts of interest in these, multilateral decision-making fora are ignored. Now, let me focus today on how multi-stakeholderism is expanding in global food governance and threatening the efforts of millions of people across the world to achieve food sovereignty and to defend their human and collective rights. The first thing here that I'd like to bring up is, again, the United Nations Food System Summit, the UNFSS. The UNFSS was a very clear set of moves forward towards the anchoring of corporate capture of food governance. And this was held in September 2021. But of course, as we in the liaison group and many social movements, civil society, and academic critics had pointed out and observed, the summit did not end in in 2021. Its initiatives, structures, and processes have emerged that emerged from the UNFSS are continuing even to today. And one very important step in that is that there is the establishment and consolidation of a UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, which is hosted by the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and jointly led by the UN Deputy Secretary General and the heads of the Rome-based agencies, the FAO, World Food Programme, IFAD. WHO and the UN Environment Programme, UNEP, also aligned with it, and these are clear indicators of how the follow-up to the World Food System, to the Food System Summit has been institutionalized. And the outcomes of the summit are set to be reproduced and advanced in different international, regional, and national spaces. You will hear after my presentation, the presentation from the National Pathways in Africa, so I won't go, and you will see what we mean by that more concretely. Now, national governments were not part of the governance structure of the hub, and this is a very critical point because it undermines the centrality of intergovernmental decision-making, and it opens the way to the corporate sector and a de facto shift from intergovernmental processes to this sort of nebulous and opaque gray zone of multi-stakeholder governance. Rights accountability, and the predominant narrative of all the initiatives coming out the UNFSS point to a corporate-friendly vision of food systems transformation, and they aim to prevent any regulation to corporate expansion and concentration. Now, a second point here in food systems governance is the expansion of multi-stakeholderism is the World Food Forum, the WFFF, which is an FAO-led initiative, again, to deepen multi-stakeholderism in food and agriculture. The WFF is a relatively recent event in Rome. It was first organized in October 21 with just a youth focus. And then again in 2022, it was organized around 3 pillars: the Global Youth Forum, the Science and Innovation Forum, and what's called the Hand-in-Hand Investment Forum. And all of these are platforms and initiatives that have somehow been engaged in the UN Food System Summit. And there are links between the actors and the organizations and institutions pushing these initiatives. Now, the World Food Forum is replacing the Committee for World Food Security through the intervention and support of top FAO leadership as the key event in October, especially around World Food Day. And the World Food Forum is, it was launched in 2019, in 2021, but the World Food Forum provides the main annual platform for the hand-in-hand initiative that was launched in 2019. And this is a flagship and one of the core priorities of the FAO. The hand-in-hand initiative supports programs to accelerate market-based transformation of agri-food systems through private investment and digital technologies. And this has, the WFF also has an investment forum that provides a platform for governments, for private capital, for multilateral development banks and donors to discuss financing, for these sort of public-private partnerships and corporate government partnerships. And what is extremely concerning to us, of course, is that despite concerns raised by member states of the Committee for World Food Security, the CFS, FAO senior management have made it very clear that the World Food Forum will be held in conjunction with World Food Day on 16th October. And this signals a very significant shift in the importance of the Committee for World Food Security. Then, of course, it's very important to point out here the role of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. And we must examine its role critically, because this is the UN agency mandated to handle food and agricultural issues. But this agency is facilitating corporate expansion in global food governance. And multi-stakeholder...
Jamali, dos minutos.
Sí.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. So, now FAO's role has become increasingly through its support for multi-stakeholderism and this comprehensive open door policy, which welcomes corporate actors. This has made the FAO really much more a broker, basically a broker for strengthening the influence of corporations in a sector of paramount public interest and in a crucial multilateral space. And this, of course, directly contradicts the FAO's mandate as a UN institution that is supposedly bound to public interest. And this is even more problematic for us because FAO lacks any robust accountability framework for corporate actors. It has no clear rules for transparency regarding ways of engagement, and it has no safeguards that are effective and workable against conflicts of interest. And if you look at the public pages of the FAO, you can see the deepening influence of agro industries in the FAO. Just look at their private sector strategy. Look at their Connect. They have a portal, the Connect portal, which shows all the formalized engagements that the FAO has, including the ones with CropLife, with Danone, with GAIN, Google, International Chamber of Commerce, the International Fertilizer Association, with Mars, Rabobank, Syngenta, Unilever, World Economic Forum. So here is a multilateral body tasked with moving forward public interest-based governance of food and agriculture, which is actually, which is instead serving as the biggest usherer in of corporations in all operations, in all spheres of operation, as well as spheres of governance. And with the last couple of minutes that are available, I would just like to go very quickly into why we see these as threats to food sovereignty, human collective rights, and public interest economies. Now, food sovereignty movements have long fought against the corporate capture of natural resources and food systems in our territories. And for many years, our movements have made important achievements in advancing and shaping global political discussions and negotiations. Now, with these new configurations that we're seeing with multi-stakeholderism and the corporate capture of food systems and expanding corporate influence in decision-making and governance, we're seeing that at the global level, important achievements in terms of democratizing decision-making, which were made through struggles of social movements and people, most salient of which are the participation of small-scale food producers, workers, indigenous peoples, social movements, and other civil society organizations in the Committee for World Food Security through the CSIPM, and in different FAO committees and processes through the International Planning Committee. These are being undermined and negated. Multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the UN Food Systems Summit and the WFF will present clear threats to all our achievements. The FSS Coordination Hub, which is now installed in the FAO is a parallel and counter structure to the SEFS. It seeks to promote corporate-friendly model of food system reforms of the summit, but it has no space for inclusivity, genuine inclusivity, that the reform of the 2009 reform of the Committee for World Food Security offered to social movements and small-scale food producers. Another very important threat here is the threat to the principles of autonomy and self-organization of social movements, indigenous peoples, and civil society, which are crucial in our being able to shape the terms of engagement with multilateral bodies and processes. Now, the UNFSS process has disrespected and disregarded these platforms. What they've done is they have gone into a sort of a cherry-picking mode and gone into a controlled participation mode where the advocates of multi-stakeholderism use the process of inclusivity, but they then pick and choose which civil society organizations, which social movements they will invite into the process as leaders. And so other social movements then are left in a terrible quandary and unable to self-organize, or, should they then be engaging in these fora and challenging them, or should they stay away from them and have these global decisions made without them? Our movement's motto has always been nothing without us, nothing about us without us. But what's happening is that these decisions are being made about social movements and small-scale food producers and workers and women and indigenous people without them. Or rather, and the way it's justified that civil society participation is through selectively picked organizations and movements. And the final point here, and I will end here, Elisabetta, and I'll bring in other points later. A very dangerous consequence of this, of course, is the shrinking space and official support for food sovereignty and for the political agendas of food sovereignty, agroecology, and the demands, in support of small-scale food producers, gender equality, and the support for gender diversity and human rights in global institutions. Why don't I stop there? I'm sorry to take so much time.
Gracias, Chavali. Gracias por presentar el resultado de esta reflexión colectiva de la sociedad civil y articulando el escenario ya presentado por Di, las conclusiones del informe de IPES-Food, ya tendremos una mejor comprensión que nos permitirá, seguros, definir una estrategia a la altura del desafío que tenemos. Bueno, ahora vamos para la última parte de esta sesión, de esta primera parte de nuestra
last presentation from this first session. So I would like to invite Sefu Sani from the World March of Women and a member of the Civil Society Monitoring Initiative on African UNFSS National Pathways, and Mamadou Goita, the Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives in Development, and also a member of IPES-Food. Both Sefu and Mamadou are going to present the outcomes of the impact analysis of the national pathways in order to achieve sustainable food systems in Africa. So Sefu and Mamadou, you have the floor for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and I hope you're able to hear me properly.
Merci beaucoup, Elisabetta. Sefu, let's start, and then I will finish 5 minutes. Sefu.
La interpretación en francés, ¿cómo está invadindo?
I think the French interpretation is coming in through the floor channel. Sefu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Mamadou. You'll notify me when my 5 minutes are almost. As you can see, I'm next to a farm here where we have some farming products. And I just want to reiterate what was said by Shalmali and has been said before. Nothing for us without us. And also to reiterate that if you need a plumber, if you have a problem with your sewer system, you will have a plumber. And if you have a problem with your computer, you will get a technician. In the same case that we're having a food crisis, the people we should have on the table are the small-scale farmers who feed the country, the women who actually take part in food production across the countries and especially in Africa, the young people who are actually the labor in the farms and take part in food production, the indigenous people, the fisher folk, and the urban insecure. This will help us to actually be able to find a solution to the food crisis that we are having now, which is a repeat of the 2007-2008 crisis that we saw. We have seen a lot of issues, especially when it comes to pro-people policies, where we do not get to hear from the ground and from the voices of these people. During the UN FSS stock-taking moment issued by the UN Secretary General, the member states were to come up with the national food pathways, but this excludes the voices of the small-scale farmers, the women, the indigenous people, the youth, the urban insecure. And this is what the African civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism undertook research to be able to bring these voices to the table for us to be able to find a solution. Mamadou Goita will deal much more with the methodology of the research, but I am going to deal much more with some of the findings of the research, which are not strange to us as we speak. And I will take Kenya, which is my country, as the case study. And like a majority of other developing countries, Kenya's economy is agricultural driven, with agriculture sector being a significant contributor to the country's GDP. And the GDP has grown by 7.5% in 2021, compared to a contraction of 0.3% in 2020. Since last year, agricultural allocation has been decreasing in the national budget, even though it is still the backbone of our economy. In the financial year 2022-2023, agriculture was allocated only 49.9 billion of the total national budget of 2.1 trillion. And 2 days ago, on the 11th of July, we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Maputo Protocol, which actually took place in Nairobi, and which was calling for at least 10% of the national budget to be allocated to agriculture. So this is one of the policies that our research is recommending. It is smallholder.
We lost.
Yeah, now she's Sefu.
Sefu, we lost your last words. I think 30 seconds, no more than that.
Okay, it is smallholder farmers that continue to care and drive the agricultural sector economy, whose contribution to GDP growth is estimated at 30%, which is the total nominal GDP value in Kenya, and has been growing gradually since 2016. One of the issues that we also found in the research was fertilizer and agrochemicals. The post-colonial period in Africa has seen the spike in the use of agrochemicals as a way of increase in food production. And find that most of the chemicals that are not allowing Africa, these chemicals when it comes to food production, they lead.
Sefu, I think if you close your video, it's possible that we can understand you better.
Can you understand me now?
No, the video is closed, but can you wrap up? Because the 5 minutes have gone almost. Just to wrap up.
Okay.
Please,
Yeah.
Sefu.
I'm going to wrap up by saying that on the National Pathways case study, we need to take agroecology indigenous seeds, public policy and investment, and also invest in women and youth as food producers. Also, the Committee on World Food Security as the best forum for globally coordinated response to food crisis, and the governments to work together in defense of the CFS. Mamadou, I'll give it up to you now.
Thank you, Sefu. Mamadou,
Okay.
5 minutes,
Merci,
please.
Yeah, 5 minutes, I will be very quick. Merci beaucoup, Sefu, pour
Thank you very
cette
much,
contribution
Sefu, for
sur le
this
Kenya.
contribution
Je
from
vais
Kenya.
revenir assez rapidement donc sur
I just want to come
le
back
processus en tant que tel.
to the process itself. This autonomous evaluation was carried out by a group set up by the CSIPM under the CFS. Having thought about the best way to carry out this research, it set up a mechanism that allowed one country per African region. We have 5 regions in Africa. So we have a Western, Northern, Central, and Eastern, and Southern Africa. And in each country, there was a researcher who was mobilized to collect data about how we are evaluating this and monitored the commitment of the states on these national pathways, as well as the pacts that were drawn up from the Dakar Forum that was between the World Bank and African states on their food systems just after the Rome summit. We've worked on several dimensions. One was the roadmap implementation, and that looked at the content as well, linked to the movements on food security and sovereignty, and the agenda that they have, or the links they have with these state-level commitments. So these are 2 key elements that we explored in our research, which led to the outcomes that I'm going to share quite quickly with you, because I think I just have 3 minutes left. The first thing is that various types of consensus have emerged. In most cases, social movements who work on food systems have been sidelines from the processes, either because there was a very small number of participants, or their voice was not heard during the process. So that was the majority of cases. The second category of countries, there was civil society participation, but that did not contribute to the implementation because they are completely disconnected from the tools to implement this roadmap. The third category refers to 2 countries in particular. We actually expanded this from 5 countries to more countries who had capacities for data, including Senegal, who has data on agroecology, as well as Burkina Faso and Zimbabwe. And so if we take those countries, we see that civil society not only has actually participated in the implementation of the roadmap, but the risk today there are basically 5 issues that we've identified. And that has led to 5 key messages. I'm sure we're going to get more, which are linked to those. The first issue is the question of governments. This was quite exclusive. It fell to the major stakeholders, which are family stakeholders and people working in rural areas. So they were excluded. So there has to be real ownership from all stakeholders.
Yeah, I will finish in 1 minute and a half. Donc, la deuxième chose, c'est
The second issue is the coherence of the policies. We realize that these processes are not linked up to the public policy, which is designed to help farmers and production system. There's also incoherences within those policies. So we have suggested that we review all of these policies to try and make them more consistent. Thirdly, funding. We've seen that most processes are blocked because there is no funding mechanism through the public funds that are established. So we have to address states on that point. Another issue that came out of this research was the governance of land and seeds. What we've seen in most case studies is that a lot of people have problems achieving the secure access to land. And these progressive policies have to take into account customary uses of land and make sure that young people and women are not excluded from this process. And lastly, on seeds, our message is that through these case studies, we have to work in the current seed system and deconnect production from multi-stakeholders, which are currently taking food production hostage. So that is the summary of what I wanted to present today. So I was glad to be able to share this with you. Thank you very much for your attention, and I apologize for going over my time.
Muchas gracias, Mamadou. Bueno, ahora vamos a tener algunos minutos para preguntas.
So maybe a couple more questions, but if anybody has anything else, and then we're going to listen to Cecilia from Mexico, and she will be making some comments on behalf of Cecilia. Thank you so much for your participation. We really value it. 5 minutes, please. Thank you so much. We're delighted to be invited to this event. Unfortunately, there was a meeting that the minister could not, in fact, ashamed that they couldn't participate, but we wanted to be sure to contribute all the same. We want to send our best wishes and also to be able to add some important comments and to participate in this significant dialogue. So more than ever, we need to join forces to deal with this crisis that we have in international food systems. We know that the summit isn't looking to do that, you know, and I know previously as well with the speakers, we know that we really have to look past neoliberal policy and look at policies that really ensure food sovereignty as a global right and strategy. And as Michael Fakri, the Special Rapporteur from the UN on the right to food, we need to look at the need to make alliances because the summit is really so influenced by corporate capture, as we've said, and everybody has mentioned this. I think we all can see this, and we have to try and minimize this and have more incidents as civil society. And we need to try to look at how we can create healthy food and ensure people's human rights. But clearly, I mean, Mexico has specifically in the CFS tried to create a working group, an open-ended working group to try and promote global mechanisms for food sovereignty through sustainable agricultural production using using input that will protect human health and that will respect the environment, including also the need to regulate, as others have said, all production systems, especially highly toxic agrochemicals. Our strategy in Mexico to transform these food systems has shown a potential for impact. Even with regards to our food labeling systems have been seen to work well. Also our fight against GMOs, etc. More 200 million farmers are in transition at this moment and are trying to ensure better quality food. And we've been speaking about the capacity for the UN to change as well. We've been speaking about this since the 70s and the 80s when we were talking about curing world hunger. We're always talking about how many people are hungry in the world. Have we really been able to decrease this? But in any case, it's maybe we've been able to decrease the percentage, but it is always 80 million odd people that, in any case. On the other hand, with there 200 million people that have issues related to food. They have obesity, cancer, etc. So corporations as well that are poisoning us with their ultra-processed food. These are essentially types of pandemics, because on the one hand, there's hunger, and on the other hand, there is also obesity. All of this is due to the increase in corporate capture that we've seen, and also the global food system and its negative impacts globally. The sovereignty of countries themselves and the mega corporations that are in fact controlling policies are in question. They control the pesticides, the seeds, the markets themselves, the processing and distribution as well. We need to transform, as we've all said, every aspect of food in the hope to create a system that is fair, sustainable, nutritional, and healthy for all. Also, just to conclude my remarks, as Mirenzi was saying on the 11th, we need to call for peace, not just to get drawn into a war, let's say, and to be drawn into this neoliberal struggle. But I've lost track of how much money has the EU, in fact, given to Ukraine. I believe 50 billion when one of the programs in Mexico for reforestation and agricultural production got about 1 million a year. So I think we need to look at how we can support and finance. For example, if we could repurpose the money that went towards war to this kind of nutritional transformation, we need to look and ask the more powerful countries where their priorities are. Do they want war, or do they want to well, for example, like even when there's an earthquake, they give 25 million, whatever. Without any peace, we are not going to be able to get out of this current crisis. So it's so important now that we really join forces to ensure change. So this is why we have a meeting. We're going to call a meeting in November in Mexico, 28th of November, I believe, until the 1st of December, to invite countries and movements to meet, because we do believe in a different way of producing our food, and this way of doing it, because clearly corporations are trying to minimize it and they're trying to undermine us. So in the same way that they did with the Green Revolution, they're trying to disappear the kind of production we wish, but we need to look for more strategic alliances. We have many, but we need more globally, because this is not going to be one more conference or one more Congress. We want to really have a very tangible result in having a alliance between governments and movements to defend our rights together in a coordinated way. And it would be amazing if we could all participate. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Absolutely, so true. If you look at like where states are in fact sending money, for example, in war, it's very clear to see where people's priorities are and the challenges that we have. Okay, so now I am going to kind of give a little bit of a summary of things that have been happening in the chat. Then maybe we have a couple of minutes for people to maybe also raise their hands and speak, and then we could have maybe have a round of comments from our speakers where they can speak a bit more freely, and then maybe a dialogue in that manner. So before anything else, there's a comment on capture even of regulators that has been accelerated, and this is really affecting industry. There's also a question if there's a campaign to divest from some areas, then how could we in fact ensure accountability for the UN? What structure, how could we really, really bolster that kind of initiative? Then there are already some suggestions, and also clearly how could we ensure that there aren't conflicts of interests, and clearly through the UN, how could they be dealt with, and how we could ensure that. And we could also look at some partial successes already. Sophia, I think, already responded to Vincent, which was trying to look at the business and human rights link. And I think there was a strategy there that was proposed for accountability through the binding treaty, I believe. And then clearly, well, we don't know about the intermediately. It's not just FAO, naturally, in the UN system, unfortunately, and it's happening throughout the UN. So that's just a flavor of some issues that were raised there in the chat. And then some people I know would like to speak. We just have a couple of minutes for that. Please be very direct, brief, so as many people can contribute as possible. Javier Sanchez. Thank you so much. I'm going to try and be super quick because a lot of issues came up before on the 11th and today, and it gives us a lot of work to do, no? Neocapitalism isn't interested in obeying the rules of engagement, as you know, things that have worked in the past decades. It is looking to make its force felt through whatever conditions prevail. I would like to thank Dee for her contribution, Mamadou Goita, and I have a question for Mamadou. The evaluation that is being carried out currently by peasant organizations in the 5 regions of Africa Is it strategic that they are not going to participate in Rome in the summit? Is that a strategy? I have my own thoughts. I feel like it's a strategy that we have with the with the World Farmers Organization, and it's really just kind of about creating pressure with clear messages to create alliances with some governments, but it's very complex environment. It's very difficult to make that wheel go around, if you know what I mean. So at the moment, it's hard to know. So that's a question for Mamadou. Thank you. Thank you very much, Javier.
Hamadi, Flora y Mohamed.
Now we have Hamadi and Flora. My suggestion
La segunda parte de la sesión
for the session is that after Mohammed, I think maybe then we could maybe have another kind of a wider round from our speakers. So Hamadi, please go ahead. Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Ahadi Mohamed Abda. I am from Mali in Western Africa. And thank you so much for the various different contributions. As some of you will have said, we've really touched on some pivotal issues, and there's a lot of work that civil society organizations have to now undertake, and their partners as well, to be able to ensure that we mitigate the impact of strategies. As Cecilia said, I think she said really well, was that there are some specific agencies that are very complicit in their strategy. And we can see that it's very important, it's very significant that the fact that we have a higher population now in the world. And despite things like the SDGs, states have not managed to make meaningful strides. So we must be actors to ensure progress with the UNFSS. I think that there's a choice, or they're saying that there's a choice. But I think that the responsibility for food is really that of the consumer. The producer is going to produce, the traders are going to bring it to market. Who's going to I think that that's kind of like the cycle that we're in. And there are technical services, there's all kinds of things.
Could you just bring up, please?
Oui. Oui, j'ai fini. C'est pour juste dire que
I was just saying essentially that businesses can't pretend that peasants are just producers. We are partners that produce food. That's all really I wanted to say. And it's important that we encourage, that we show people that we have real influence, and that we are better positioned in many countries to have rights as small-scale food producers. Thank you very much, Mamadou.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Perdón por eso, mas como tenemos también una otra parte de la sesión, tenemos que ser muy específicos en nuestra participación. Bueno, ahora
We've got another session, so now I'm going to give the floor to Flora and then Mohammed.
Por favor, Flora.
Flora, you have the floor.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. My name is Flora. I work with Society for International Development, and I'm also a member of the Civil Society Financing for Development mechanism, which is a sort of equivalent of the CSIPM, but within the UN discussions on global economic governance. I just want to thank you all for the presentations. It was really interesting and helpful. And I wanted to also share with you that we are tracking this very similar trends of multi-stakeholderism and corporate capture at the UN in New York, with everything that's related to economic governance discussions as well. And I will share later in the chat with you a comment by the civil society FFD mechanism on this similar trends, and especially on the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda and all this up and coming discussions around Summit of the Future and these parallel spaces of governance that he is trying to create, and that is moving away from the intergovernmental processes such as the CFS, and we see in the case of the FFD process as well. So I wanted to share this with you, also to say that we're in solidarity and watching your work, and I'm sure that we can try to create new, stronger alliances between our groups as well, because I think these trends, we can track them happening at the UN as a whole, and not only in the food space. And just to also flag some more inspiring and useful developments that are happening at the UN in New York, also related to economic governance. For instance, the new approval of a resolution by the Africa Group on the UN Tax Convention that very much relates to the reform of global economic governance, democratizing it and supporting countries to potentially develop further their fiscal and policy space. And that for sure will also relate to potentially moving away from commodity dependence and agribusiness that is focused on export. And so there are many connections possible, I think, between both our works on economic justice and food justice, and just wanted to highlight that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Thank you, Flora. So Mohamed, please, it's your.
Merci, bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. This meeting is really a boost of optimism, even if we've seen that there's a lot of backsliding. Mohamed is from an organization that's active in Via Campesina and in the civil society mechanism. Can you hear me?
Yes, we.
As I was saying, I'm from the National Federation. We're a member of Via Campesina. I said that we are witnessing a backsliding. What we are seeing right now is that peasants are being deprived of their rights. I want to know, my big question is, we know that the UN is involved, but between the FAO and the UN, which should we be focusing on for our struggle and to defend the CFS? Because we are here to defend that committee. And we're currently at the end of a long struggle from 2008 onwards. Since then, the civil society has made a place for themselves at the table. So now they're telling us to get out. So what is the role of the FAO, and what does the UN think? I think we need to get more analysis into that, so that it's not binary. It's not just either FAO or UN. I think we really know who we are directing our demands to. Thank you.
Gracias, Mohamed.
Thank you very much, Mohamed.
Solo minuto.
Now we have about 20 minutes for the original panelists to react to the questions and comments from the floor, but also to have a discussion amongst themselves. The idea is that you can respond to how did the stock taking moment and the multi-stakeholder debate is favorable to corporations, and what frameworks can we use to inspire us, such as the framework for the control of tobacco. Can we come up with new frameworks given the complexity of food systems? How can we strengthen the Committee on World Food Security? And how can it respond to this new layer of global food crisis? We would like to talk about how to identify and call out the co-opting of language and so-called inclusive governance processes by public-private partnerships and multi-stakeholderism. And how can human rights groups, food sovereignty movements, and other actors contribute to this struggle? So I would like to invite our panelists to speak freely now. We have around 20 minutes. So it's supposed to be a real conversation. So the invitation is that you now participate to react to the questions from the floor and the questions that I've just asked as well. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Quem gostaria de empezar?
Who would like to begin?
I can step in as Elisabetta and say a few words about the stocktake moment, which is coming up.
Great.
Yeah, and I was glad that Shalmali raised the point about how civil society has been kind of compartmentalized in the process of the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub into different sub-constituencies. And it's not at all clear, and there seems to be no space for self-organization. And I'm an academic, but I understand from the civil society and Indigenous Peoples mechanism that it's a really important principle to have self-organization and self-nomination of who represents civil society. And so yesterday I went through a document that was on the Food System Coordination Hub's website, which was called Stakeholders Contribution Document for the Stocktake Moment. And I did a little word count, which was, and this was published on July 4th, but business and private sector are mentioned over 40 times. And the term civil society is mentioned exactly 4 times. So 10 times more mention of business and private sector. But there are lots of mentions of these sub-constituent groups of women, youth, Indigenous people. And what I would like to hear more from the other panelists is to what extent has the CSIPM itself been asked to self-nominate anyone? Because my concern looking at this situation is that groups, civil society groups that advocate for the right to food and broadly for food sovereignty and other kinds of rights for producers and consumers are not at all necessarily represented in these sub-constituent groups that have been identified by the hub. And those subgroups are actually very clearly situated in an organogram, like a diagram on the website of the hub about who gets to be involved. So there seems to be a clear cutting out of the overarching kind of civil society groups. And I would like, I just want to have a conversation with other panelists and hear a little bit more about that, because I really appreciated Shalmali's comments about, what does civil society do about this? Do you engage and be uncomfortable about it? Do you stay outside? Do you interact with those other groups that are being tapped on the shoulder to participate? And I think it's a really troubling trend, the way this is rolling out. That's one point. The second point is just about, and I was really glad it was mentioned as well, that although there's a repeated mantra that no new institutions have been created, and this is a hub that only coordinates, it clearly has a much bigger budget it is an institutional structure, and it's taken on a whole parallel institutional structure, as was mentioned. And again, I think that's really important for us to continue to call out, because we keep hearing back from the hub itself that it's not actually an institution, but also troublingly, because it's not a UN institution, it doesn't have to follow UN rules. And so that raises all kinds of alarm bells as well. So I just wanted to throw those points out, and would love to hear from others about them.
Gracias, Jennifer. Bueno, la
Thank you,
idea.
Jennifer. The idea is that you can react freely. I don't need to moderate necessarily. I hope it can be freer. I'm launching this invitation.
Yes,
Chamali.
Chamali?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to I was trying to unmute myself. Yeah, I don't have all the answers, but just one of the questions that was asked, for example, earlier was it shouldn't be either FAO or the UN, and what's our strategy there in dealing with the FAO, and in and I think yes, shouldn't be the FAO and the UN. The problem, I think, the big challenge we're facing here is that the FAO is supposed to be, I mean, it is a UN body. It has the resources of the UN body. It has all the, it has the heft of the UN body. And for decades since its formation, it's been the main policy advisor for governments of the South. I come from India, so I don't know of every region, but FAO is, I mean, they've really been like royalty in our countries. And I mean, literally, and these are the same institutions that are then opening the doors and for large transnational companies in the agribusiness sector, agri-food sector, chemical sector, agrochemical sector to come in. I mean, I've been to quite a few FAO meetings in the region, in Asia region, and it's shocking what kinds of entities are allowed to come and make presentations there, small-scale food producers, social movements, indigenous people, urban, food producers, they're not in the picture at all. And it's not as though member states wouldn't appreciate them. We've also been in meetings where we've raised concerns that member states have supported, but there is a certain power that FAO management, that technocrats running these UN agencies, whether it's FAO or it's UNEP or whatever, that they have amassed, and that they with that power, they are running, they're basically shaping the direction of these multilateral institutions. And I think that's very dangerous. In terms of whether CSIPM has decided to self-nominate, no, no, we are not. That's, we're maintaining a critical position, and on the UNFSS and on these processes. But I think one small thing that, I mean, not small, but a point that I would like to flag here, which I think was discussed on the 11th, but unfortunately I missed the 11th, my apologies, is that, the kind of multi-stakeholderism and corporate capture of governance that we're seeing in food systems and agricultural systems is being broadened through our common agenda of the United States, of the United Nations Secretary General. And this vision of sort of global cooperation, what he calls through an inclusive, networked, and effective multilateralism, this is the core, these are the strategies that will be discussed in the Summit of the Future. So and indications that of the processes that are already underway on the Summit of the Future, the ones that have already started, they resonate significantly with the major controversies around the UN Food System Summit. And influential actors from the UN leadership, member states, and the corporate sector, they seem to see the Summit of the Future as an opportunity to push for system-wide application of a multi-stakeholder governance model. And this is what the UNFSS has been promoting in the food domain. This is what UNEP and some others have been, and this is what is being pushed in terms of the fall solutions in the environmental and climate change domain. And when we see what's happening with GAIN and the Sun Business Forum and food system certification and fortification and so on, that's being pushed perhaps in the nutrition domain. So we're, this control of regulatory systems, regulatory authorities, and defining what actually is acceptable and what the world's people must eat and how it should be produced. This is being decided by corporations and by their I don't like to use the word ecosystem with corporations, but their associated entities, their so-called scientists, their knowledge producers, and so on. And the Summit of the Future is something we really need to watch out for, because it presents a platform to discuss governance architecture of the United Nations for the next 25 years. And we need to be really alert and join hands on this. And I think Flora already mentioned this on the issue of financing for development. So I think we need, as activists, social movements, civil society, and academics, to do our networked resistance to this networked multilateralism that's being promoted through this kind of system. And here, I think one very important, my last point here is the importance of elevating the knowledge and the knowledge systems of small-scale food producers and social movements. We have a very good, we've been able to develop some very good networks and foundations through the past 4 or 5 years of working together with academics and with people, scientists. And I hope we can continue this, because we really need to do this to challenge the corporate science that these corporations are producing. So I stop here.
Thank you, Chamali. Hey, Mamadou.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is a lot to say in terms of strategy, because I still think that we are missing many important opportunities in Rome, particularly because Rome meetings are very messy places in terms of strategizing. But upstream, I think that we are not doing enough to create connection between different segments of the CSO's constituencies. For me, this is really very important. I didn't understand the whole Javier question, because I don't know if I missed some of the point in English, but I think that there is a lot of work that we should do before getting to spaces like the different stock taking that we'll have very soon. Because upstream, we are working on collecting data to have evidences on different issues, but sometimes, we ourselves, or this information are denied by part of the CSO's component itself. So how to create conditions? First, it starts at national level, because we are ignoring different segments of CSO's group because of one or another perception that we have from them. So we need also to bring this on the table, to say that at national level, there is a way of constructing processes that will be as to tell ourselves the truth, but around data and evidences, and then so the linkages between those who are really committed in a progressive way and those who still didn't understand that they need to connect and to understand some of these key challenges, political challenges, is very critical. So this is the problem that we are facing also with the World Farmers Organization and the like. And the case is really more difficult in Africa if we have organizations like PAFO that is bringing all the regional farmers organizations. They are on different perspectives. Some are really committed on family farming system and all the sustainable food system, but others are completely out of the box. they are not only not concerned about that, but they are completely distorting what is going on at that level. So, but what can be done is internal construction within this kind of institution like PAFO, not ignoring or not having a soft consensus on things, but to also talk about those things that can make ourselves angry, but at the end of the day, we'll just make consensus, hard consensus on the spaces that we have to defend collectively, and slowly we can just get common positions on some of these things and go. So this is my first thing, that to ensure that at country level, at regional level, it can be also at continental level, to try to build this kind of interaction within our own groups, as CSOs, academics, and other related, the media and the like, and then to take time in Rome sometimes, just to prepare, even though we know that there will be a lot of contradiction, but to take time to discuss some of these issues. If you don't do that, I think that all the time will be divided and then create conditions for saying that, okay, you are talking on the name of who, because the others are at the other side. But we all know that this is a collective fight. It's not easy, but we can make it happen in working that way. Evidence building, just also trying to work on where it's not easy to discuss, and then for sure that will come in a very strong group. And alliance with some countries that are also very progressive actually in the issues will be very critical. You take West Africa, actually, there is a process at ECOWAS level. All the 15 countries have to work on national strategy on agroecology. It's a good step, but this will be completely distorted if you don't have this dialogue internally within different segments of CSOs and academic and research institutions, and then to go hand in hand to go to the essential when this transition is just taking place, for how long, and what are some of the key pieces of the puzzle that we need to put together so that we can make it. So this is, for me, a very strategic issue that we are sometimes ignoring, and then we go to Rome. It's a big mess, a lot of contradiction, and it's make the dance, and of the dancing space for corporations who are be, how is it in France, frotter les mains, because we are just fighting against each other, and we are not at all coming to this kind of spaces. So this is what I want to add, if I understood what Javier was saying in terms of strategy and collaborating with different segments of the CSOs and states.
Thank you, Mamadou. I will open the floor for some questions, comments from the participants. We have around 10 minutes. So if you would like to make a comment or ask some question, please raise your hand and take the floor. Yes, Jennifer, please.
I don't want to take up space for other participants to speak, but I just wanted to add one additional point, which is on sort of networking with others who are working towards similar goals, but might not be part of CSIPM. And there's a couple of things. Someone actually sent me a direct message in the chat just today about an initiative that I had seen earlier, which is a group of researchers calling for a framework to deal with corporations on the basis of, they're concerned about corporate determinants of health. So it's more of a public health focused initiative to call for a framework agreement, for example, within the UN to rein in corporate influence on matters that affect public health. And a lot of that has to do with food, but it's similar to what we called for in the Tipping the Scales report about a framework for addressing corporate influence in global food governance. But at the same time, I just wanted to say, I think this is a really interesting moment to be, or a propitious moment perhaps, to be pushing on these issues, because we're seeing renewed interest among sort of activists within the antitrust movement, like lawyers in the US and other places who were really trying to strengthen antitrust rules that have been weakened over recent decades. And oftentimes those folks who are talking about the need to improve antitrust rules are mentioning the food system. And so there's potentially scope for broadening out and bringing, people together from these different constituencies who are all working towards the same goal, to better understand and strategize at a broader level. So it means maybe stepping a little bit outside of the food system or to different parts of the food system. But I think there's a lot going on that's really interesting right now. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. So the floor is open. If someone would like to raise some points, please feel free for that. Also, our people who will be invited by. Yes, Claudio, please.
Thank you very much. You know, many of us participating today have been in the trenches for a long time. We have hit our head against the wall numerous times. We keep hoping that we are going to make some advances. The truth is, it has been 2 steps forward and 1 3/4 backwards. It's true, if we wouldn't be doing all the yelling that we do, it would be 2 steps forwards and 0 steps. So the idea is, are we doing the right thing of trying to change the institutions, especially of the UN, that are so penetrated by corporate interests? And perhaps, you know how many millions of hours of brain power we have spent, Elisabetta, you and me and Shalmali and everybody, the 158 people sitting here? If that amount of time and effort would have spent at the grassroots, wouldn't we be much further advanced in terms of getting convergence of social movements that we would need to create true counterpower? We are not a counterpower right now. They tolerate this and keep inviting us to their venues because we just don't make any difference. We keep saying things, we object to texts, we include paragraphs, we put permanent parentheses in the text, and nobody's listening to us. I mean, are we not needing to have a webinar on new ways of changing? Isn't it time to have nonviolent resistance, as I put in the chat, or perhaps go to the street? Like, it has been proven that that is probably, at least in some points, more effective than trying to look for amendments here, look for one member state more to vote for our positions. I mean, this is a game. This is a chess game, and we need a checkmate. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Bueno, Cecilia, Chaumali, Alfredo ask for the floor. I would like to ask Cecilia, Chaumali, Alfredo to be, and Josephine, to be really brief because we have 10 minutes to finish our session. So please, Cecilia, the floor is yours.
Sí,
Sorry.
lo mío es muy cortito. Han pedido
I'll try to be really brief. I gave you my email, my phone number, and also the concept note of the event in Oaxaca. And then, yeah, you have all my info to get in touch. Sorry, it's all in Spanish still. Clearly during the meeting, we'll have French and English interpreting and translation. You're really so welcome. There would be field trips as well during this meeting. And for anybody interested, please do consult the concept note. We want to create these alliances to be able to support each other and to help each other in every country, to be strategic within social movements, indigenous peoples, and our progressive governments that are, still in transition, but moving towards healthy and fairer food systems. That's all. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thanks, Cecilia. Shamali, then Fredo, and then Josephine.
I will also be very quick. I think the issue of a system-wide corporate accountability framework is very important. And I hope that those who are working on this, I mean, maybe we could find a way to all connect up and start working on this. And this is definitely something that we could take on collectively in our networked resistance, no? To this networked multilateralism. We take this up as our network resistance, and we organize maybe inter-platform dialogues about this, because this is something that we can come up with. And of course, we need strong legal help here. And we do have the support. There's a lot of really brilliant legal minds who can help us on this issue. No? Just a quick, and then I just wanted to add a couple more things. It's true, we have come from the trenches and we are continuing to stay in the trenches. And it's not that grassroots work hasn't been done. It has been done, and it is being done. Every day it's being done. But I think one of the things we have to account for is what's happening to our national regimes. Across Asia, our political regimes are fascist. They're extremely authoritarian, they're patriarchal, they're intolerant, and they're classist. And, I can't put all the isms to it, but grassroots solidarity is being broken. Movements are being, workers, the rights that have been long fought for and won are being undermined, are taken away, just being snatched. So constitutions are being changed. I mean, I kid you not, this is a very serious issue across Asia. So what's happening more and more is, yes, you can march and you will be beaten, but we still march. But at the same time, what's happening is, this is where the multi-stakeholderism advocates are very clever. They come in saying, your government is authoritarian, your government doesn't listen to you, but we will give you space. So they invite movements, they invite civil society, they invite unions, they invite, activists, and people want to be heard. So they'll go to the forum to be heard, and before they know it, it's co-opted. So there is this dynamic is also happening, and I think an important part of our solidarity is to really understand, has to be to understand these very challenging political circumstances, social political circumstances, and economic circumstances that our comrades on the ground are. Because if we can't address those, I don't think we can build up solidarity. This is the solidarity that has to be reflected up in the multilateral spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Chamali. Alfredo, Josephine, please, 2 minutes so we can finish on time. Thank you. Alfredo?
Sí, bueno, creo que desde el inicio del siglo pasado,
I think that since the start of the century, there's been a kind of war because the most powerful countries in the world want to dominate the planet. There's been a huge influence in the power that corporations have. And in this process, peasants have to be given a central role. Struggle, first of all, is in all of our countries, but also we need to recognize peasant organization. To strengthen them is key. And we also need to value consumers' roles. This is the alliance that will ensure that we can change the production paradigm and the food system to make it more fair for all peoples. Thank you. Thank you, Alfredo. Josephine, 2 minutes, please.
Oui, bonsoir à tous.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Josephine Atangana from Central Africa. The speaker's line is somewhat breaking up. The interpreter will just give you what is audible. The speaker's line continues to be inaudible. Josephine, could you turn off your video, please? If you could maybe turn off your camera, that would be helpful.
Por favor.
Please, thank you. Let's try now. Unfortunately, the speaker's line isn't much better. The interpreter will try to give what she can. There is a need for mass mobilization because often the population isn't aware of the need for advocacy and how it affects them on a daily basis, because organizations need the media to communicate in many cases. The speaker's line is inaudible at the moment. Speaker refers to the important role of consumers. And it is important that we look at sustainability as well in terms of the approach of the states. It is clear that a certain number of governments, regional governments, and are also acting. Thank you so much, Josephine, says Elisabetta. I'm going to give you the floor just for absolutely 1 minute because we have to finish this workshop. Thank you.
Zainal?
Zainal, can you hear?
Yes, okay, thank you. I am Zainal from SPI Indonesia and member of Rebecca Messina. So following what Samali said about the how we be careful to be coopted in the forum, and also the what Michael Fakri said yesterday about we have to inside and outside strategy. But I think for us, we have to clarify it is a genuine UN or not. So of course, the UN organization is not UN. But if we in the FAO, of course, we have to fight. Otherwise, corporation will dominate. And yesterday, the 5 body of UN launching the Sophie 2023, and we know what the result. So we have to think to focus on that. That this is part of the failure of the food global system handled by corporation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Zainal.
Thank you so much, Zainal. Sorry for putting pressure on you, but we just have 1 minute left. I would just like to share some of the last activities that we're going to do with you and just make a comment
and have a
with regards to what we're doing now. And I think
whether we
it's
should participate in the
important
formal processes of the summit. In Brazil, civil society, we have been criticized a lot by movements and organizations because we were not participating in the summit. Why? Because if we weren't inside it, then we couldn't influence it. Well, given everything that we've said today about the limits of participation, we feel that being outside is a very important way to participate in the decisions of global food systems governance. We could do much more from the outside than we can from the inside, as long as we have a proper organization of our communities and movements. Now, on the 17th of July, We're going to have a press briefing calling for true food systems change.
Will facilitate the session, and several of our partners will be participate in this press briefing. The link for this activity will be in the chat. And we thank you everybody for the participation on this session, and we hope to meet you again very soon with very, very dynamic and enthusiasm to confront what we have facing about the what's happening with food systems governance, but not only on food systems governance, but on multilateralism governance. Thank you so much for this this moment with us, and we hope to see everybody very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you, Berta. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta, and thanks
Muchas
everybody.
gracias a todos.
Gracias. Cuídense.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you to the interpreters. Very
Yes,
much.
the
Thank you to
interpreters
the
are our
interpreters.
heroes.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thanks, interpreters and everyone.
Thank you.
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Madu Goita, no me has contestado. En fin, pues bueno.